Hello, Mark. Good morning. Thank you for joining the personal branding series that I run on my blog. Very delighted to have you. You have a very unique background, and I'm very curious to hear more about your perspectives on personal branding. So before we get started, it'll be great if you could quickly introduce yourself for our viewers.
Good morning, Anisu. Yeah, lovely to see you again. And thank you for the invitation. I think, for the purposes of our conversation today, I think the story sort of begins 12 years ago when I, my wife and two small children decided that we were going to move from England and come and live in India. So we left London and set up base in Mumbai. And there were a number of drivers for that, one of which was professional, and the fact that I felt that there was some exciting opportunities in India and more broadly, if you like, in other emerging markets in Asia. I also have familial connections. My wife is Gujarati, although she was born in Africa, grew up in the UK, and she had not lived in India herself. But that means that we have two children who are both English and Indian. Now, in the days of the Raj, an Englishman would have sent his children from India back to England to do their education. And we decided that we would do it the other way round. So we brought them, and they've had the last 12 years of their education in India. And my wife and I have established two businesses during that period. So I think perhaps that may give you the sort of background that you're looking for.
Fantastic. And I also read your profile, and I know you did a short stint in the Bollywood movies. So I know that'll be of great value to our Indian viewers. So why don't you talk a bit about that?
Well, so first of all, I like the fact that you asked that question because it means that I know that you've read my profile, because I tuck it away just as a single line at the end of my profile. I've had the opportunity to act in two Bollywood films, the first of which was a movie called Hawai Zada, which starred Pallavi Sharda and a then young and unknown actor called Ayushmann Khurrana, who's obviously gone on to become a very bankable Bollywood star. And I would like to think that I had something to do with launching him on his career. I played the part of Lord Victor Bruce, who was the Viceroy to India, the Queen's representative. I don't think that film was a great commercial success, but it was quite fun to do. And then more recently, I played the part of another historical character called Sir Claude Auchinleck, who was the most senior British military man in India at the time of the Red Fort trials, which was the trial of Subhash Chandra Bose and the other leaders of the Indian National Army at the end of the Second World War. And that was a fascinating project. So, I live in Mumbai, and you would recognize the fact that the movie industry in India, centered in this city just a few miles north of where I am, is an important part of the economy. And it's a world that was, really kind of unknown to me. I operate in the sort of corporate world of B2B corporate communication. And so it was really a great privilege, if you will, to have the opportunity to go and dig around in and get some first-hand experience of the movie business, which was quite fun. But as you can see, I'm a middle-aged white man in India, so I'm somewhat typecast. So it's not something that I'm planning to make a career out of.
Very nice, very, very interesting story, I would say. So let's begin with your understanding of personal branding. I mean, what according to you, how do you kind of define it?
Yeah, so I was very interested when you approached me, and flattered, but also slightly sort of bemused in the sense that, I don't think of myself as a personal brand, and I don't use terms like thought leadership to describe the sort of things that I do. But given that we were going to have this conversation, I went away and sort of reflected on that a bit. And I felt that, somebody who has those characteristics, the characteristics of those people, I think, are that you need to have a voice, you need to have an opinion. I think that there needs to be some level of advocacy. In other words, I think one needs to be able to take a stand on particular issues. And then there needs to be some consistency in terms of the way in which you speak about, write about, or enact that advocacy within the community in which one operates. So I sort of felt that those were perhaps the broad characteristics of people that have been able to build personal brands.
Fantastic. And if I would ask you, and when you think about a personal brand, what are some of those signs which tell you that yes, I'm progressing in that journey towards being one?
And that's a good question, and I suspect that it differs for different individuals operating in different segments. I guess for many people in the 21st century, one of the measures of success is the reach that one has through various different social or digital media channels. I work in very sort of niche area of business, but my professional practice is in B2B communications, where one's not looking for large scale reach, but being able to target and communicate effectively with small groups of people. Right. I think from my own perspective, the fact that I'd been invited to and then was able to write and publish a book is a sign of the fact that, one's got something credible and of interest to say. Right. So, I perhaps take that as a marker, if you will, in terms of some degree of perhaps being able to speak with some level of authority. I mean, I think that, the fact that I've got a grey beard also probably contributes to that as well. Part of it's a function of age, I assume.
Great. So if you were to think of your personal brand, I mean, what are some of those building blocks and what, that come into your mind as in terms of how you kind of go about this process?
Yeah. I think perhaps three things. The first of which is that, I've been an entrepreneur for the best part of 20 years, and more of that time has been spent in India. You will recognize the fact that India is not always an easy place to be an entrepreneur. Right. And the fact that I've been able to have some degree of success in that, I think, sort of distinguishes me perhaps, or sets me apart to some degree. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I'm a migrant, right? I came to India. I'm an economic migrant. I came to India because I felt that there were interesting professional business opportunities for me. Hmm. That puts me in a minority. It also makes me something of an outsider, although I recognize on a daily basis that it puts me in a position of immense privilege. And I'm mindful of that, as I say, on a daily basis. But it makes me something of an outsider. And I think, again, gives me a, not unique, but a different perspective. More recently, I've been involved in and thinking about the world of work, the future world of work, and how new technologies and changing attitudes to work are really transforming the way in which people as individuals engage with organizations and the way in which organizations acquire and think about their talent requirements. And again, that's an emerging area of thinking, and I guess to some degree I've been able to build something of a position in that space. So I think those are perhaps as you described them, the sort of pillars, if you will, of any brand such as exists.
Got it. And I like the fact that you mentioned that you are an economic migrant who's moved the other way, and then how do people associate? What are some of those attributes or those keywords that come to people's minds when they associate with you as a personal brand?
So one of the things that I really have enjoyed about living in India is the degree to which my compatriots, if you will, in India are interested in what the experience of being a migrant, a foreigner in India is like, right? So, my experience is that if you go from India to other parts of the world, you don't pay a lot of interest in terms of asking you, what is your experience like coming into our country, right? Whereas in India, lots of people want to know, what is my experience? What is it like to come and live among us? What is it like to be here, on a permanent basis living in India? So, I think that's one of the things that perhaps is one of the questions that people ask. And then there are, questions about entrepreneurship. People think it must be very difficult to come and to do business in India. I mean, my experience is that it's no less or more, no better or worse than doing business in, other parts of the world. Being an entrepreneur is a tough gig wherever you are. There are some facets of India, lack of sort of soft infrastructure, that perhaps don't make it easy, but, they're things that with grit and determination one overcomes.
Got it. That's very interesting. So, if I were to ask you, when you look around, who are some of those names that come to your mind? A couple of names who you think are personal brands, and what are some of those attributes or that you admire about them?
So, voice and opinion and advocacy are things that I, identified earlier on. I'll give you a couple of examples. I think the first person that I ever thought of as a personal brand, and I may not have used that language at the time, I was, a young man in my sort of late teens or into my early 20s, was a chef, a guy called Keith Lloyd. I think you may have seen him on the BBC, yes. Right? He certainly came to India at one occasion, and he spent time in France. And I thought he was absolutely brilliant. He was a very flamboyant character, but he made cooking sexy. He made it something which was adventurous and fun. And I've had, as a result of that, not only because of that, but in part because of the way in which Keith Floyd opened up a world of sort of culinary practice. I've been an amateur chef for 30 years. This guy was just great fun. Always had a glass of wine, always sort of looking for an adventure. And this was in the days before social media, right? So before Instagram and Twitter. Imagine if this guy had sort of been around now. You'd have been absolutely brilliant. So he's somebody that I felt had quite a powerful, he had a voice, he had an opinion, and he was an advocate for, you know, doing simple things with good produce, right?
Right.
A more contemporary example is a guy called Parag Khanna. He's based out of Singapore. He's of Indian origin. He's worked in the US, he's worked in Germany, and I think in the UK. He's written several books, one of which is called The Future is Asian. I'm a great believer of the fact that the future is Asian, which is one of the reasons why I decided to move from the West and come and spend my, you know, the second half of my career in India. But I think, you know, again, he has a voice, he has an opinion, he's an advocate. He uses the platforms that are available to him very effectively, and I think has built a very sort of strong and powerful personal brand. And then there was another, yesterday I thought of somebody else whom I've never met. I've met those other two. I had the opportunity to meet Keith Floyd, and I've met Parag. There's a lady on LinkedIn. She's in England. She's from the north of England, and her name is Jo Watson. And she's just got a brilliant online persona, right? She's from the north of England. She's got opinions. She's sometimes a bit crude. She's got great humor, and she just understands how to use that platform in a really kind of effective way. I've never done any work with her, but she's somebody who I would love to have the opportunity to work with, just because of the way in which I've seen her interact on that platform. So again, somebody who I think in a, you know, not in a public domain, but just has built a really kind of compelling personal brand.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, great examples, and I really like. I can really resonate with some of the names that you're talking about. So, you know, when you reflect on your journey, I mean, what are some of the challenges that you kind of faced, and you know, while you were thinking? I mean, I know you may have not consciously thought of a personal brand, but what were some of the challenges, and how did you kind of think of overcoming them?
So I think, I mean, it's a good and quite complex question in a sense. You know, again, I come back to the entrepreneurship. It's not easy building and growing businesses, and it's particularly not so, I think, in India. My wife and I, who have co-founded 2 businesses together, have a saying, which is never, ever, 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 ever give up, ever. You know, so one really does need sort of grit and determination in order to be able to succeed and to overcome those challenges. I think the flip side of that is that, you know, typically the great experiences outweigh the challenges, and I think that's what, you know, drives you forward every day. The great people that you meet, the great people who choose to come and work for you, and, you know, we're a small creative business. There are lots of other opportunities which will probably pay better and give them, you know, higher profiles, but there are people that choose to come and spend their time with us, and we're deeply grateful to them for doing that. And, you know, clients who give you interesting, sometimes challenging, complex projects to work on. Again, you know, those are some of the signs to your earlier question about the fact that you're getting something right. Yeah, if you can attract the right talent, if you can attract the right kind of clients, then you've obviously got something. And I think you're, you know, it would be a sign that you're articulating it that in the right way.
Absolutely.
I also recognize, this comes back to an earlier point, the great privilege that I have by being, if you like, a white man in India, both male and white. Okay, so that gives me access and advantage and opportunity, which perhaps are not available to many other people. So whilst there may be some sort of hindrances to me, there are also great privileges and advantages which are bestowed upon me.
Got it. Brilliant. So switching gears, just wanted to ask you, I mean, there are a lot of people out there who, you know, want to start out on building their personal brand. So, you know, how can they think about building their personal brand from scratch? And in a related question, what's your advice for youngsters out there who think that building a personal brand is about being a one-time YouTube hit or a wonder? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so two parts to it. I mean, the first of it, again, I think comes back to having a voice, being confident in that voice, being authentic and consistent, right? And advocating for something within a community, and that community can be small or it can be large. But I think those are the sort of characteristics.
Right.
In answer to your second question, I don't give advice to millennials and Gen Z. I have 2 teenage children. I have first-hand experience on a daily basis that they're not interested in advice from me, right? So I don't go there. I think what I do, and this would be true both in my personal life as a father,
right,
and in my professional life, is that I seek to be able to enable those young people to be able to make good decisions for themselves, right? So that's not really about giving them advice, but it's about trying to do everything possible in order to enable their success, to give them confidence in their own opinions, to give them confidence in their voice, to allow them to be able to make well-judged decisions, and then to be able to live by them. And I think, in the work environment, we seek to do that. That's not always easy in India because, many young people, and this was really the sort of thesis that I wrote about in the book, have grown up in families where they're not given a great deal of choice. They go to school where rote learning is the modus operandi. They go to further, on to further education, and they're not encouraged to critical thinking. They go into workplaces which are very kind of hierarchical and, disciplined. And it means they're just, they don't have the experience or the opportunity to be able to sort of make decisions. So one of the things that we try to do is to enable that. So I don't think it's about giving advice. I think it's about being able to provide the environment in which they can make those decisions.
Fantastic. And we are right now in the midst of a pandemic, and thankfully with the vaccination ongoing, hopefully things will get better. But wanted to understand from you, how should personal brands be thinking about themselves when there is a crisis or something like a black swan event like COVID-19 hits?
Yes, so I'm pleased by the fact that I have not yet got into the age band where I'm allowed to have the vaccine, so I'm not that old. But I think from the 1st of April I will be able to do so, and I will be at the front of the queue, and I'm an advocate for vaccinations and all of the things that go with it.
Right.
The second part of your question was, how do you respond in the context of a crisis, or as you put it, a black event? My response to that is that, as a professional communicator, I've always seen crises as, right? So in crises, there are great opportunities. And I think that what we're experiencing now is potentially new stories. We'll see interesting innovation. We'll see old orders being dismantled. Again, it comes to my point of work, new work. There are opportunities for people to forward thinking or whatever happens in sort of reality and economy. And again, I think we will look back. There will be more individuals out of this with great credit. I think consistent. There will be okay, good, treat them some.
Got it. Sure. So as we wrap up, Mark, I wanted to ask you, what's your mantra or recipe for personal branding success, if you were to summarize in a line?
Be to thyself be true, unto thyself be true. I think ultimately is what it comes down to. And I've just been writing about this over the last couple of days. A number of experiences where, from a professional perspective, people have sort of suggested that we might do things differently, that we might be a bit more like the other people in that space, that we should perhaps take some lead from the other people that are, our competitors. And I've learned over the years to say, no, actually, what we want to do is to distinguish ourselves and to be confident, to have the confidence of your own convictions and to be able to stand apart. And that standing apart isn't always an easy thing to do. But if you have that courage of your convictions, then in the long run, it's the right thing to do. So I think if I sort of distilled it into one thing, it would be that: be true to yourself.
Fantastic. Great. This has been brilliant, Mark. Appreciate you taking the time, and I think these are fantastic insights. Thank you again for sharing your wisdom and sharing your unique story with us.
You're very welcome, Anisu. I'm sorry that I didn't actually get to ask you any questions. It feels a little bit like the sort of tables have been turned. My original career was as a business journalist, so I've been much more accustomed to being the one doing the asking of questions rather than being interrogated. But I have to say, I think that your questions were great. They're well thought through. There's a good sort of flow to them. So I appreciated the fact that you'd done some research on me, which I think made for an interesting conversation. So I hope that it met your expectations.
It did. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Good. Great to see you. Have a great